The Monroe County Community School Board delayed the final reading of its racial equity policy at this week's meeting after some say it needed more work. WTIU has this story.
Some students who helped write the policy and the Monroe County NAACP branch say it lacks steps for implementation. Bloomington High School South sophomore Sydney Crosley helped write the policy. Last May, she shared her experiences with racism with the board.
And when students sat down and helped draft sections of the policy, we felt dismissed and not valued. With that being said, I am asking you, school board members, to table this policy so we can better the policy for all MCCSC schools.
Crosley says students were promised an anti-racist policy and a racial equity policy is different. The board says guidelines for implementing the policy will be created and voted on separately from the policy. Bloomington High School North teacher and former MCCSC student Olivia Jordan says a racial equity policy is a positive and necessary step for the district.
I would have loved to have this opportunity and this policy when I was a student. I understand that the next step are the guidelines, and I want to speak it into existence. So I really hope that those are the next steps that we're able to take and that we can really outline those procedures.
Jordan says she came back to teach at MCCSC partly because of her own experiences with racism and desire to see education improve. For Indiana News Desk, I'm WTIU.
The policy's first reading was in December. Its final reading is now set for February. We're joined now with Maqubè Reese, the president of the Monroe County chapter of the NAACP. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just start. The students were promised an anti-racist policy. They got a racial equity policy.
Right.
Can you explain the difference?
Sure. And so before I explain it, I want to talk about the mission of the NAACP, which is to achieve equity, political rights, and also social inclusion for advancing policies, practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination and acceleration the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and persons of color. And so it's really important for us to understand the different terminology. So racial equity is all about what Ibram Kendi mentioned in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. The racial equity is it's shared power, but anti-racism really gets to the root of what the issue is, which is racism. So you have to understand the root before you can say we want shared power, which is racial equity. So the students have been very vocal about the decision to have an anti-racism policy so we can highlight the systematic perpetuation of racism within our school district.
So are there things in the policy that you would still like to see addressed?
So absolutely. So policy is really important because that's the foundation of how you guide different things, right? And so it's really important that we understand that the policy matches the intense impact that students, not just these students, so these thought activists have been talking to us since July. So about 9 months we've been working with them. And so it's really important that we understand that the intense nature of the policy has to match the intense nature that the students are requesting, which is that accountability. And that's what we believe that we want to support with and champion that with the administration and within our community.
What has the NAACP's involvement been like in crafting this policy?
Sure. So we didn't have any insight in the policy, in the creation of the policy, which isn't a bad thing, right? So the thing is that because we are advocating on behalf of these students that have brought this up, the young thought leaders, right, these activists since July, so about 9 months now, we want to make sure that we're mindful in helping them to create the realities of what they're asking for. So we weren't involved in the creation. We read it just like everyone else in December. And now we have until February to give those additional thoughts as it relates to the policy, not just the guideline, but the actual policy.
Now, have you looked at other policies across the state and finding other things and be able to bring those back?
Sure, yeah. So there are different policies throughout academia, whether it's in higher ed or whether it's in the school districts. And so one of the ones is our neighbor, which is IPS, Indianapolis Public School System. They created a policy, and then it was actually, there was a resolution put in place of it saying Black Lives Matter, and their policies was very straight to the point, and it had measurable accountability. And so that's something that we're looking for too. And another thing that some of the young activists mentioned was thing by Brittany Jones, who her article was focusing what's the school? UConn, that's the school. And so she talked about these anti-racism policies and how you can really reimagine how we can implement that here locally. So yes, we've been definitely looking at different policies for sure.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Take care.